welcome to the Talking Crop podcast. My name is Kathryn Seebruck, and I'm a commercial agriculture educator with University of Illinois Extension, serving Daviess-Stephenson-Winnebago counties. Talking Crop is a row crop production podcast with episodes occurring every other week during the growing season between May and September. In each episode, I bring on a guest speaker to discuss topics related to their areas of expertise. In today's episode, I'm joined by Madelyn Celovsky, Michigan State University Extension Conservation Agronomist Educator. We discuss cover cropping strategies post-corn, soybean, and wheat, interseeding and overseeding, cover crop mixtures, and more. In the episode description, you'll find a link to the Midwest Cover Crop Council website and selector tool, as well as the National Cover Crop Variety Testing Program Report for 2024 to 2025. For the next episode of Talking Crop, I'll be joined by Matt Ruark, professor and extension specialist in soil fertility and nutrient management in the University of Wisconsin-Madison Department of Soil and Environmental Sciences. We'll be discussing soil health, nitrogen optimization, and manure on cover crops. That episode will air on Wednesday, August 5th. And now, please enjoy this episode of Talking Crop, Cover Crop Planning and Decision Making with Madelyn Celovsky. Hello, Madelyn, and welcome to the Talking Crop podcast.
Hi, happy to be here.
So I'm going to have you kick things off by introducing yourself. So could you please provide a little bit of your background as well as what your position is and what you specifically do in your position?
Yeah, so Madelyn Celovsky, I'm a conservation agronomist educator for Michigan State Extension. I'm based in a county office in Jackson County, but I cover Southeast Michigan. And for my extension role, I work mostly with corn, soybean, wheat, and now canola growers in the area. Just any kind of agronomy work, doing on-farm trials, educational programming, extension stuff. I also work, part of my position is funded by the Midwest Cover Crop Council. And so I work on various projects for the Midwest Cover Crop Council, which if you haven't heard of it, you should look it up. So just a big group of researchers, farmers, extension, industry, anybody who knows anything about cover crops comes together, creates resources, educational programming about cover crops in the Midwest. And so I do a bunch of different things for them as well. And I'm sure some of that stuff will come up. So, yeah, that's what we do in Michigan.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And Madelyn teaches she's the instructor for the Cover Crop Essentials course, which I took. Yeah, I took that last year. It's a really great course. So I think you have a cohort now, but next year when the word gets out about the next one coming out, I'll definitely put that out into the world too, to hopefully get some more applicants. It's a really great course. I highly recommend anyone interested in taking it to take it.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a pleasure having you in it. It's it runs August through November, and it's full of Midwest ag professionals, so anybody that works with farmers on cover crops. And we kind of meet every other week, and everybody plants their own test plots, and we get to compare, and there's a little competition on who can grow the best cover crops. And it's fun to, I think it's fun to talk to people in Missouri and North Dakota and just hear what everybody's doing, how everybody's making cover crops work.
Definitely. And speaking of being in different parts of the country, I was especially excited to have you on today. So we're going to be talking about all things cover crops. And I was especially excited to have you on because you, of course, are in Michigan. And sometimes there's a misconception that cover cropping can't be done even in Northern Illinois. And so I was happy to have you on to dispel some of those myths because you're obviously much further than Northern Illinois. And so I was hoping you could maybe speak to that just in general at first before we get into some of the specific questions. Like, what do you tell people when they're like, oh, cover cropping can't be done in this part of the world?
Absolutely. We get that all the time. To be fair, I'm in Southern Michigan, and we hear that all the time. There's no window to plant cover crops. And it sounds like you guys are hearing that too in Northern Illinois. There's cover crops in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. There's farmers who are benefiting from cover crops up there. There are ways to make it work. There's ways to make it pay for your operation, even with a short window. even here in Michigan, most of our cover crops are planted after harvest. So after corn harvest, after soybean harvest, a lot of that is going on in November, maybe December even. And it's really, at that point, we're talking our winter cereals, cereal rye, triticale, wheat. And there can be benefit even with that late seeding date. But beyond that, we're also finding ways to extend the season. So interseeding cover crops has really taken off, at least in southern Michigan and the western Lake Erie Basin. A lot of acres are flown on with airplane or drone now, especially even before the crops come off. And so it adds some growing days, right? And so there are creative ways that you can get cover crops on, and cover crops that actually are giving you benefit, right? We're not just putting them on to put them on. Guys wouldn't keep doing it year after year after year if we weren't seeing good benefit. So I guess, one big kind of innovation is the getting them on earlier before harvest.
Yeah, and you mentioned a lot of it is being done post-harvest, and that's a huge way that many people start out, right? Because it's typically the easiest to do. And so I wanted to talk about kind of breaking it up into crops, looking at corn, soybeans, and wheat. So if we look at, after the cash crop is harvested, what's working best for after corn, what works best after soybeans, and what works best after wheat. And wheat is the one that I think is the most fun because you have the most versatility, because you can start that season way earlier than post corn and post soybeans. So when it comes to cover crops, what is working post harvest of those three cash crops?
Yeah, so for post corn especially, we're really just sticking to cereal rye. Or some other winter cereal. Our corn could be coming off in December, right? I hope it isn't, but it does. We do have seasons like that. And so cereal rye, you can get it on. The recommended date is going to be earlier, is like first week of November is when we're recommending. But it can be broadcast on, it can be drilled in. And soybeans love getting planted into cereal rye. So that's the big thing, is we love planting soybeans into cereal rye. You can if you get a really nice cereal rye stand, it doesn't hold back your soybeans at all. It can help prevent weeds. It's really nice to plant soybeans into that cereal rye. After soybeans, one way that some farmers are getting cover crops in earlier and are able to be a little bit more flexible is we're planting earlier day beans. And you might not like hearing that in Illinois, but the genetics, we have years and years of on-farm trials and research variety trials, and we're just seeing better genetics in early day beans. And so our beans are coming off a lot of times earlier. And a lot of that is coming from guys who are planting wheat anyways. And so they have been experimenting with early beans just to get the wheat in early. And so we do have beans coming off, by late September. And then we're talking about still cereal rye is the main option. But sometimes you can get things like clover or rapeseed. Those are other overwintering options that we can get in. I guess if you're planting your cover crop into soybean and then planning to plant your corn the next year, we do see some issues with planting cereal rye ahead of corn. I guess the main thing there is just being careful when how big you let the cereal rye get before you plant your corn.
Right.
And so that's why we like trying other things. One other species is camelina, winter camelina, that we've been trying out the last few years. They've had really good success with it in Wisconsin, Minnesota. It's kind of newer to Michigan. But the reason why we like winter camelina after soybean, if you can get it established, is it breaks down a little bit easier. It's not going to be as much of a problem for your corn the next year. But that's something that we're just getting started with here in Michigan. I know that there's some in Indiana. I'm not sure about Illinois, but Wisconsin, Minnesota, they're seeing good, promising responses. And then wheat. So yeah, like you said, wheat you can have a lot of fun with because you have a longer growing season. You've got more days before frost. And honestly, there are quite a few operations who might just plant cover crops after wheat, and that's the only cover crop they do, right? They're not they don't want to figure out how to squeeze it in after corn or after soybeans, but they're all in for that wheat. And you can plant a really nice diverse mix that can grow quite a bit before frost. And I don't know, I mean, the options are almost limitless. You see like 15, 19-way mixes that are out on the market, and they do a great job.
Yeah, definitely. And, legumes are notoriously difficult to establish, especially when you're trying to do them post-harvest, because they just need that time for establishment to really allow a producer to reap the benefits of a legume. And so I was curious if you're seeing a lot of people doing more legume plantings, or whether it's in a mixture or what have you, in a post-wheat situation.
Yeah, I mean, so one of the old, like, cover crops are not new, right? One of the oldest classic examples of a cover crop for around here is frost-seeded clover. So seeding a straight stand of clover into wheat in like February, March, and then letting it grow under the wheat canopy. And that is, if you frost seed clover under wheat, you take that weed off, that clover explodes. That's the best way to grow nitrogen for your corn the next year. You're seeing like 20 to 40 pounds of nitrogen credit for that next year. That's a very old practice, and you can see it still today. But you can plant, there's legumes that you can plant after wheat. Peas, or you can still plant clovers at that time and still get a nice stand. It's a little bit controversial, but hairy vetch is going to be your highest producer. As far as legumes go, it's going to produce the most biomass, which biomass means you're growing more nitrogen. It does get, I want to say hairy vetch, but I want to say it can be hard to control, and it can become a weed if you're not ready to do it. There's operations that swear by it. There's guys that swear they'll never plant it again. But if you're looking for a nitrogen credit in your corn, hairy vetch is one of the strongest option. As long as you're ready to control it. On a note on taking a credit for nitrogen before your corn, I would say the best way to figure out if you can take a nitrogen credit is going to be to test. Do nitrogen rate trials in your own fields. Yeah. It's super variable how much nitrogen you grow, especially when you've got legumes in a mix where across the field, sometimes the clover does better in certain areas and sometimes it doesn't do better in other areas. And then it's variable by year, how quickly that organic nitrogen breaks down the following year. So it can be risky business to go ahead and just cut your nitrogen rate in the corn the next year. And it takes time to kind of tweak and figure out, how much can you actually cut.
We've been talking about what we do post-harvest, and naturally the next step is, planting your cash crop, right? And yeah. I think that's, some folks get a little bit leery because that's where issues can arise, right? They don't want anything to negatively affect their cash crop, and understandably so. And as we know, when you plant cover crops, you don't just plant cover crops and not touch anything else or not change anything else. That's just not going to work. And so could you touch on some of those strategies that can be implemented to avoid those potential cash crop complications that could result from utilizing cover crops?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. When we're adding cover crops, it's not just like buying a product and being like, okay, this is part of my management now. You're adding it to a system. Tweaks have to be made. We want to make adjustments. I've already mentioned like shorter day soybeans to get cover crops in earlier if you want to prioritize a successful cover crop. On the other end of it is planting. Yes. When it comes to planting conditions in the spring, cover crops can be good at helping fields. It can be good at helping fields dry out quicker, right? Your cover crop is actively using moisture. The soil does stay cooler though. And then there's the other side of things as well. In a dry spring, that cover crop is going to keep using moisture, and maybe it dries out too quickly, right? And then you've got harder planting conditions. And so a few tips we give to farmers who are starting out with cover crops is going to be, especially when you're doing cereal rye ahead of corn, which is going to be the starting point that most people are going into, terminate that cover crop earlier than later. So we're talking cereal rye, and I'm talking about only overwintering cover crops because that's mostly what we're doing in Michigan because that's what we have time to get established. So this overwintering cover crop, cereal rye, ahead of corn, we want to terminate early, like 10 to 14 days before planting. And so you don't see that competition for water. Maybe a green bridge for disease or insect pests. If you terminate that cover crop early, before planting, especially corn, then you'll help avoid nitrogen tie-up or, like I said, water competition, disease or insect pressure. Now for soybeans, we see less of the problem planting into your overwintering cover crop, your cereal rye. You see less problems. And so that recommendation isn't as necessary. And that's especially for starting out, right? We're talking about this is your first year with a cover crop. Maybe you signed up for a program, getting paid to seed cover crops. This is the first time you're doing it. Just go early to make things easier. That is the main issues that we see is water competition, nitrogen competition as your cereal rye is breaking down ahead of corn, and then possible disease or insect issues because you've just got continuing living cover for them.
So something I was thinking of as you were talking, you mentioned earlier how if you plant a legume ahead of corn, being a little bit careful about taking that nitrogen credit. But something you mentioned just now is when you have like cereal rye ahead of corn, you can get the opposite effect where you have that nitrogen being uptaken by the cereal rye. And so do you know of any information out there of like when to make a decision to, potentially increase your nitrogen rate in corn because of maybe really heavy cereal rye biomass or like a late termination?
Yeah, there's some really good work that's happening in Iowa. There's, this is something that's been documented over and over is this competition for nitrogen in a grass cover crop ahead of corn. Yeah, I think Mark Lick in Iowa has done lots of work in the last few years. The general recommendation that we see across the Midwest is you don't necessarily have to increase your total nitrogen that you're applying to corn, right? That's not a blanket recommendation. Really what we're looking for is to make sure to front load that nitrogen, and starter nitrogen in Michigan is pretty popular. It's pretty widely adopted. We just don't have the juice in the soil that maybe you guys do in Illinois. And so, it sounds like maybe starter nitrogen is becoming more popular in Illinois.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. So just front loading with 30 to 50 units of nitrogen ahead of corn, is going to really help offset that early season competition of cereal rye, because the cereal rye is not stealing nitrogen. It's just stealing it for a little bit. And that's when corn needs it, right? That's when our corn needs it. Now there is the work that's being done like in Iowa and at Purdue. They are maybe finding that if you get a serious amount of cereal rye biomass, that may increase your, the maximum return to nitrogen rate.
Yep.
So it might actually be increasing it. That's not across the board. We're not seeing that everywhere. And it's really in those situations where you have super high cereal rye biomass. So that's why the earlier termination when you're going into corn might be helpful with that.
And you mentioned way at the beginning that a lot of folks in Michigan are doing some interseeding work because, post-harvest, like you mentioned, there's that smaller window of establishment. So some producers are starting to do things earlier as it pertains to cover crop planting via interseeding. So with that, you mentioned, they're flying it on with like drones or airplanes. And are you seeing an increase in research on that aerial application of cover crops?
The last few years, we have been doing some trials. Now we have, I guess there's a few different interseeding windows. One is like an early interseeding where in corn, you're either drilling it or broadcasting it into corn around like V4, V7. So that's super early. And then there's the late interseeding, or sometimes it's called overseeding. And this is going to be more of like in corn when the leaves are starting to turn. This is like September. We're talking like right after Labor Day or right before Labor Day kind of thing. So when the leaves are starting to turn for corn, and then right around leaf drop or right before leaf drop for soybeans. So same time, like, end of August, early September. That early interseeding timing in corn, you can get a pretty nice cover crop established, depending on moisture, of course. If the water shuts off, your corn's struggling and your cover crop's struggling. We don't see competition between the corn and the cover crop, even when it establishes well. Like we didn't see yield reduction. You can get a really nice cover crop, and you've got more species options. So when you're early interseeding, we're looking at things like radish, a bunch of different clovers, of course, annual ryegrass or cereal rye. Those are all options. The main problem with that early interseeding is you have to make sure your herbicide program in your corn isn't going to hurt your cover crop. So thinking about any pre-emergence like residual herbicides that you're putting on in your corn, we want to make sure that it's not hurting your cover crop. Generally, we've seen some success with that early interseeding. Now moving to the like overseeding, late interseeding window, it can be super weather dependent. We're not talking about drilling, right? At this point, that's not an option. We're talking about either by drone, airplane, or like a highboy interseeder kind of high clearance ground rig. Just broadcast on the surface. If you don't get rain, which in September, the last few Septembers, it's been very dry. If you don't get rain, you don't get good cover crops. It's herbicide residuals is less of a problem in that later season, right? At that point, we've lost some of that residual control. It can still have some impact though. So making sure, like thinking about the whole system, right? Making sure that our herbicide program isn't impacting the growth of our cover crops, but we can see some success with small seeded cover crops like annual ryegrass. We've seen some clover establishment. Looking into how well camelina and rapeseed as well may do at that seeding timing, but really at this point, annual ryegrass is like the most popular option. And that's another one that gets controversial because there has been some herbicide resistance that has popped up in annual ryegrass. But again, some guys swear by it, some guys swear it off. So it's what works and what you're comfortable with on your operation. But yeah, that late interseeding can be a really nice time. It's, generally we're seeing after tar spot fungicide applications. And so it's a time where the drones and the airplanes are maybe not doing as much. Mm-hmm. And so for custom work, it fits in really nicely. And then it's something that you don't have to think about after harvest.
And something that has been touched on here and there as you've been talking and answering these questions is mixtures. So when some producers are just starting out, they're typically not doing mixtures, but as they progress, they potentially become more interested in implementing mixtures. And I was hoping you could touch on like how to design a mixture, right? You heard of, I think you had mentioned like 13-way mixes.
Yeah.
Like how many is too many? How many is too much? When are you like not seeing a benefit of that crazy high number of species? So I know that was a lot of questions kind of wrapped into one, but if you could touch on some of that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we'll start with like why mixtures, right? And there's actually some really good work coming from University of Michigan, Jen Blesch's lab that has investigated the different benefits that can come from doing mixes versus single species. And, they're finding different things like some, mutual function between, like, I guess the cover crops are helping each other essentially. You get multiple benefits and more biomass if you have multiple species. But beyond that, one of my favorite benefits of using mixes versus single species, and this definitely applies to fields in Michigan, is some seeds are going to work in some areas of your field and some species are going to work in others. We have super variable soils, right? You walk across a field, you could get 5 different soil types. Certainly, hills, like slopes and, knobby hilltops. And so having multiple species in a mix that might work in different areas of the field is going to help you just get good coverage, right? We want coverage everywhere. That's how you get the benefit of cover crops. And so having mixes that have multiple species that might work in different areas is good. As far as like how many species or how do I go about designing a mix, the big thing we like to start off with is have multiple functional groups. So functional groups would be your grasses, your legumes. Brassicas are a pretty big functional group that have a pretty independent benefit. And then you've got lots of other types of broadleaf. But so the grasses are good because they've got mostly fibrous roots that go down pretty deep, that are actually pretty good at breaking up compaction, but also just grow quickly. You get good coverage, really good at preventing erosion, building soil. Legumes, of course, fix nitrogen, and so that's good. Even if you're not planning on counting for that nitrogen in your next year, it can help the whole mix break down quicker, right? We talked about how building too much biomass might, especially with grasses, might tie up some nitrogen. If you have legumes in there, that's food for the microbes. It's like fast food for the microbes that helps break it down quicker. And so just having a legume in there, even if you're not planning on counting or taking a nitrogen credit, can be good. And then brassicas, generally we're talking like radishes, rapeseed. They tend to have pretty big tap roots, which again, we're talking about compaction, can help break up compaction, and just have a different root structure. So you picture these like 19-way mixes and you've got all kinds of tangles above ground. What we really want to picture is what's going on below ground, and having all those different roots down there is really good. So yeah, making sure you have maybe one of each of those functional groups could be good. When I look at one of those pre-made mixes, which that can be great to have a bag of a pre-made mix, is super convenient. What I'm looking for is I want to make sure that all those species make sense to seed at the time that I'm seeding. Because I see that quite a bit where it's like you've got maybe, like a cool season grass and warm season grasses and all of these different species that might not make sense to be seeded, say, at my August seeding timing after wheat harvest. And only half of them are going to survive anyways. And so making sure that what you're paying for, the seed that you're paying for, are all seeds that are supposed to work at that time. If you want a tip about how to figure out what the good seeding window is for a lot of different cover crop species, the Midwest Cover Crop Council has a great selector tool. That selector tool is going to give you the ideal seeding window by county for a whole bunch of different cover crop species. And those are based off of, frost-free dates, as well as, input from researchers, farmers who use those cover crops. So that's a really good way to know when that cover crop is supposed to be seeded. Other factors that I want to think about when I'm looking at some of those premixes or when I'm making my own is seeding rate. So in general, grasses are going to be more competitive. And so if I take that recommended single species seeding rate, which you can also find in the selector tool, they've got all the recommended seeding rates by drilled versus broadcast versus aerial application. If I take that full seeding rate for a grass and I put it in a mix, that grass might outcompete everything else in my mix. It can be tempting because grass seed is usually the cheapest. So you're like, yeah, just throw it all in. But then the money that you spend on your legume or your radish, your brassica, is wasted because you just now you just have a stand of grass that was like slightly more expensive than it would have been if you had just done a single species grass. So what the recommendation that I've been told is cut your grass rate around 30%. So take that single species seeding rate for cereal rye, for sorghum sudan grass, whatever grass you have, cut it by 30% in a mix immediately, even if you're just adding one species. So like oats and radish is a really popular post-wheat mix for us. We cut that oat rate in half. And then any brassicas that you're adding also tend to be more competitive. I mean, a lot of times we're just thinking radish. Like radish comes out of the ground very quickly. It bushes out very quickly. Same with mustard. Very competitive. And so sometimes, especially for those more competitive ones, we're talking about cutting that rate by around 50% as well. Because we, again, don't want it to outcompete everything else in the mix. Now, legumes are a little bit more tricky. They tend to not be as competitive. You're thinking about like clovers, especially, are going to, take more time to germinate. They take more time to establish. They do tend to be the most expensive seed as well. It can be easy to just say, well, I'll just cut that legume rate. Well, say like for the clover, it's supposed to be 8 pounds as a single species rate. Well, I'll just cut it to 2 pounds for the mix. But 2 pounds of clover is not going to compete very well. You're not going to grow very much clover, and you're not going to get the benefits very much if it's outcompeted. In the case where you want to count on some of that nitrogen, absolutely keep that full single species legume rate in a mix. If you're not planning on taking that nitrogen rate, that's when you can start playing with, maybe reducing it 50%. But just know that like vetch clovers, they're just not going to be as competitive in the fall. They eventually come up, but if you don't get good establishment when they're germinating and growing, then you're not going to get much growth come spring.
Yeah, no, I love all of what you said. That was all super practical and I think easy for people to take with them and to help them make those decisions.
It can be fun. You got to have fun with it. Also put species in that you want to see grow or that your neighbors want to see grow. Sunflowers, super popular. Great for photo opportunities. Wait, I did one more mention, or one more. The other thing I see with super high diversity mixes is sometimes there's multiple species in there, and seeding depth can be really hard to choose if you are drilling. So say you've got this really nice post-wheat mix and you're going to drill it. Not all seeds want to be buried like field pea does to 2 inches, right? And not all species are even going to germinate if you kind of just scratch it in the surface, like field pea. It just will sit there. Oats sometimes will just sit there if you don't, drill them deep enough. And so having lots of different seed sizes can be challenging when you're trying to figure out what the seeding depth is or the seeding method. Putting all of those different seeds in a box drill, they're going to shake out. You're going to see separation, and you'll see parts of the field that will have all of your oats and field pea, and then you'll have parts of your field that'll be clover and ryegrass, maybe, So, just thinking about all that when we're looking at those big, complex mixes.
Yeah, there's a lot to consider, which,
sure.
to your point of having fun with it, I mean, I'm sure it can be frustrating learning these things, but the more you learn, the better informed you are to do it better each subsequent year.
And get that 19-way mix, but make sure you go out and walk your fields. Go look at what worked. So then next year, maybe it's those 5 species that did really well. Just get those and seed them at a higher rate. Yeah, so just walk your fields, right? Get out and take a look.
Scout. That's all I ever say. With selecting species, sometimes you have to take it a step further and consider the variety as well. And I think this is more commonly talked about when it comes to like cereal rye, just because it is so prevalent. And I understand that sometimes the general consensus can be to avoid cereal rye with variety not stated.
Mm-hmm.
And there are, as cover cropping becomes more popular and prevalent, we're doing more research on them, right? So there's like variety trials now. And with that, is it still that consensus then that we want to avoid that variety not stated? Or are we getting to a point where like variety not stated might be completely obsolete anyway? Like, what is your take on that?
I am a huge fan of cheap. I think that you should save money wherever you can. And there are scenarios where bin run or just variety not stated seed is going to work. When we're talking cereal rye, the main concern that I have with VNS is essentially if you're planning on roller crimping. If you're planning on roller crimping to terminate and you need a very specific flowering timing, avoid VNS.
Sure.
If you're planning on terminating it 10 days before you plant your corn, go ahead. Variety not stated should be just fine. There's other species where I'd be more particular, certain specific clovers, right? Where in Michigan, I'm on the edge of the hardiness for some things like maybe Balanza clover, which might do really well in Illinois, but we're kind of at the edge where it might not do well. But so the National Cover Crop Variety Trial, Balanza clover is in there. There's multiple varieties, and some of those varieties are actually performing well in Michigan and are hardy. And so I think when we're talking about trying to add species that maybe we're on the edge of hardiness of, finding winter hardy varieties, also in vetch too, we're seeing certain varieties do better here. Now, annual ryegrass is one that I also get worried about variety not stated because of the potential to have herbicide resistance kind of crossbred from honestly like ditch weeds. And so named variety of annual ryegrass is one tool in the toolbox to prevent having herbicide resistant annual ryegrass on your farm. Also, same thing with maturing timing for annual ryegrass. So it's really important to get it before it starts to flower. But if you've got a bunch of different varieties in your variety not stated seed for annual ryegrass, termination timing can just be harder. So that's something to watch out for. So it is scenario, like it's context specific, what you're doing with your cover crop. It's species specific. But I do think it's really nice to see these variety trials, the national cover crop variety trials happening, because we are learning, I guess, maybe what we're missing in potential. Bin run seed can be great. It's cheap. It can get the job done. But there is some growth here because all the species that we're using, all the genetics that we're using for cover crops kind of came from forage, right? A lot of these were bred for forage, not specifically for how we're using them, which is a lot of times seeding them later, right? And so that's where that having breeding like more winter hardiness could be good. A lot of times we're broadcast seeding them. And so maybe finding species that are like varieties that do better just broadcast, right? Or just like hardier when broadcast. And also, like, what do we care about with cover crops a lot of time is roots. So there's even networks that are breeding for more root growth versus above ground. And so there's really exciting stuff happening. And I think we'll see more of that down the pipeline as far as like commercially available varieties. But yeah, just watch out for those variety trial results.
Yeah, that's going to be a really great resource for folks to be able to kind of compare and contrast different things that could work for their operation and their location. So Madelyn, I would love to wrap things up by having you talk about something you've touched on here and there, and that is that selector tool from the Midwest Cover Crop Council. It's been mentioned on a couple of episodes by now, and it should be a household name at this point, right?
There you go. Mm-hmm.
But could you talk about the tool just in general? And I also wondered, I know the Midwest Cover Crop Council is very active. So does that mean that this tool is pretty regularly updated with new information as well?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's so many like decision tools out there, right? Not just for cover crops, but for everything in agronomy. And something that I really like about the Midwest Cover Crop Selector tool is it is regularly reviewed. And so, for example, this was made over a decade now ago. The process started. And the climate was a little bit different back then. They were using climate normals from decades ago. And part of the selector tool is that seeding window. And what informs some of that seeding window is the frost-free dates by county, right? Those frost-free dates are changing. We've got the data on that. In Michigan, we've got additional days in the fall that are frost-free, as well as on the other end, frost-free days in the spring. So our season is extending. And so around every 5 years, each state kind of meets to look at those seeding windows, look at those seeding rates, look at the recommendations, and adjust them. And so in Michigan, we just did that last year. It took forever. Imagine like a bunch of like strong-willed, like very informed researchers, farmers, just a bunch of nerds, a bunch of cover crop nerds get together, first in a room and then over Zoom for hours and hours, deliberating each of the dates, each of the rates, what species should even be on there. And so it's a very fun process. It takes a lot of time, but it does make it so that selector tool is kind of a living document that's constantly updated with what we're learning about cover crops and, of course, how our growing season is changing. And so I'm not sure where Illinois is at in their review process, but just know that, it is being updated. A complaint that we get about the selector tool is it doesn't have enough species on it because there are a lot out there that you can get, right? You look at your seed catalog and there's, maybe twice as many as what you're seeing for what's available, what the council is recommending for your state. And that's because the species doesn't get added until there's enough research and farmer use to justify having those recommendations. So they are conservative. Sure. The seeding dates are conservative. It's really intended for, these are the recommendations to make sure that you get success. It's for the guy who started that, is like first year in a program, maybe is getting paid to put cover crops in. This is how you make sure that you have success. Mm-hmm. And so beyond that, do with that information what you want. You can push the limit. Like I said, we're getting cover crops in December sometimes. That's not what the selector tool says to do. But they are conservative recommendations that are constantly being updated. So we got to add some new species last year. Maybe Illinois will add some new species this year when they do their review. It's fun to kind of, really deliberate and make sure those things are updated.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you touched on that because I think it's reassuring for people who use it to know that it is, hard and fast, reliable information. And I like your point that basically if you want to be experimental, go ahead. But, that's not the document for, the experimenters necessarily. Mm-hmm.
It's a starting point. Definitely a starting point. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Well, Madelyn, thank you again so much for joining me today for this episode. I appreciate your time and your expertise. And I really just love that this is super practical information that people can take away and, implement some of these things that we've talked about today.
Yeah. So if you have wheat coming off and you're thinking about putting a cover crop in, maybe throw in something fun.
Yes.
Something not conventional. Try something new every year and learn from it.
Once again, that was Madelyn Celovsky, Michigan State University Extension Conservation Agronomist Educator. Be sure to join me for the next episode of Talking Crop, for which I'll be speaking with Matt Ruark, Professor and Extension Specialist in Soil Fertility and Nutrient Management with University of Wisconsin-Madison. That episode will release on August 5th. Until then, thanks for talking crop.